Okay, welcome everybody to tonight's talk. I'm glad that we've kind of established this parallel realities of online and offline in terms of communication, so that's great. I believe it's also one of the last talks at the Vienna Design Week this week, so we have the pleasure to kind of somehow conclude the week of interesting activities within the Vienna Design Week. Thanks for hosting us, Vienna Design Week. It's been a pleasure to be part of the whole action, even 2 weeks and even months before, when setting up our AA nanotourism visiting school, which Alyosha, who's online with us, will explain a bit more further. So welcome all of you, welcome also to all the audience watching online. Today we're gonna have a short presentation on, let's say, a very vast topic called a future of tourism, where we'll try to tap on some possibilities as to how we could start to even concoct this topic. I'm going to give a brief introduction. Alyosha is going to follow up with a brief overview or introduction of the AA Nanotourism Visiting School, and then later on I'll give a little follow-up on the outputs of the projects that we have developed in the last 2 to 3 weeks that are now also exhibited as part of Vienna Design Week. And then to add to that, we're going to have a panel discussion amongst 5 panelists, which I'm very happy that they've come all here together, both physical and online form. And I will introduce them just before the panel starts. Okay, so a future of tourism. I think what particularly us working now within the field of tourism try to all answer is what role can tourism play for a planet in crisis? And inevitably we live in times of a particular type of crisis. I will just outline now 2 main points. So the first type of crisis is obviously the COVID-19 situation. And what this has caused, amongst many other things, is an increased need for local forms and systems of tourism. And that's something that we've been trying to tackle with our visiting school program. And I'm sure many big players within the tourism system are doing so as well. But what is the current mindset within the tourism industry is that it's largely focusing on the appropriation of local culture and nature to cater for, let's say, the apparent needs of paying visitors. And to perhaps best illustrate that on a slightly more provocative level is the quote by the author Don DeLillo, who essentially claims that tourism generates stupidity. And I read, "To be a tourist is to escape accountability. Errors and failings don't cling to you the way they do back home. You're able to drift across continents and languages, suspending the operation of sound thought. Tourism is the march of stupidity. You're expected to be stupid. The entire mechanism of the host country is geared to travelers acting stupidly. You walked around dazed, squinting into fallout maps. You don't know how to talk to people, how to get anywhere, what the money means, what time it is, what to eat, or how to eat it. Being stupid is the pattern, the level, and the norm. You can exist on this level for weeks and months without reprimand or dire consequence. Together with thousands, you're granted immunities and broad freedoms. You're an army of fools wearing bright polyesters, riding camels, taking pictures of each other, haggard, eccentric, thirsty. There is nothing to think about but the next shapeless event." So, to some degree, we could claim that many of us have been part of, or could identify with this to a certain extent. So it's something that we need to obviously tackle. Second point is obviously a much more overarching topic, which is the climate crisis, which has inevitably increased a need for a renewed relationship with our planet. And the future mindset for that type of tourism could be, or I would dare say should be, to move away from an extractive towards a restorative model of tourism. Now, there's two, let's say, pointers for how we could go about that. One is to perhaps reference Bruno Latour, the French philosopher, who talks about the idea of a terrestrial society, where he writes that the term terrestrial tries to capture the general trend towards the Earth that has marked the beginning of the 21st century. Political ecology tried to interest people in the fate of nature, but nature, by definition, is exterior to society and doesn't enter easily into a political agenda. Another word is necessary to target the goal of landing somewhere after a few centuries of emancipation away from the Earth towards the infinity of progress. So, how to tackle that? And this is where I think definitely design has a role in creating some sort of meaningful change in this transition, is to consider what is called restorative design. So this is a quote that's been made by Paolo Antonelli and Ala Tanir in 2018, and has been hacked by Tina Gregoric, who is also one of the co-authors of nanotourism, who replaced the words design with nanotourism and futurism with tourism. And it reads, "The undeniable current state of emergency is nevertheless met with collective indifference at best and orchestrated denial at worst. We believe that nanotourism has inherent restorative abilities and can cater to this displacement of action. Nanotourism can provide nanotourism can provide appropriate mental, aesthetic, and emotional tools required to process and handle key issues of the present day. Most importantly, nanotourism has the much-needed capacity to help decipher complex circumstances and take steps towards constructive action. Indeed, nanotourism has the ability to creatively expand on the world and produce new worlds that were previously unimaginable, to concoct new stories, and therefore to generate new visions of contemporary situations. In recognizing the need to trace symbiotic relationships, it presents a meaningful opportunity to reframe humans' rapport with nature and to articulate different kinds of tourism." So a lot's been said in that regard. And I think through the talks today and also the presentation of Alyosha, where we will explain a bit more about nanotourism and the visiting school, I think we can perhaps start also an on-site dialogue into this direction. I would give now the word to Alyosha.
Thank you, Jakob, for the introduction and setting up the base of this discussion, I guess. It's very, very wide. I'm just checking, is it everything heard well? Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, which is going to be this. Everybody sees that? Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the nanotourism visiting school that has been running for the past 2 weeks in Vienna, in collaboration with Vienna Design Week, and some of those projects, the 5 developed projects, which are experimental, heavily experimental projects done by one group of students on site right now during the Vienna Design Week that everybody can experience. I'm sure that you have shared some experiences with our student projects. So, Nanotourism Visiting School, we are part of the Architectural Association School of Architecture from London, which is one of the schools of architecture that sees always the discussions of what architecture is on the forefront of the global discussion on what the education of architecture is today. So this year, in collaboration with Vienna Design Week, in the context of Meidling as the focus district where Vienna Design Week is placing the Festivalzentrale. So why tourism matters? We already know that tourism represents quite a big portion of our everyday lives. It represents 1 of 10 jobs in the world is in tourism. And over decades, tourism has experienced continued growth to become one of the biggest economic sectors in the world. And today, business volume equals or even surpasses the one of oil, food, or automobile industry. And that stands tourism in a way completely overwhelms our lives. We cannot avoid it, neither in a form of us being travelers or in a form of us being inhabitants and enjoying our everyday environment and being kind of faced with the results of tourism as such. And just to kind of make a little comparison to maybe like a good decade before today, when the global financial crisis with the famous financial slide down of Lehman Brothers heavily impacted quite a lot of industries around the world, we were in a way observing, surprised that back then the tourism hasn't really suffered much or almost anything. And that was kind of, in a way, a red light that something has to be interesting about tourism, that it's so kind of untouchable. But just recently we learned that can be a completely different experience. I mean, with the last health crisis, tourism was one of the most affected industries in the world. Practically, it stopped overnight. And that places us today in a completely different position as thinkers, how we think about what is the future of tourism. But nevertheless, until recently, and I'm pretty much sure if something doesn't really change radically, also when pandemic is going to, in a way, fade out a little bit, maybe months or years, whatever is going to come, the most proliferant model of the industry of tourism is the model of mass tourism, which is always the same. It is the same model that it's placed in different parts of the world, and it doesn't really pay attention, or it's different in any way that it does react to different social or economic or cultural contexts that are pretty much different around the world. So that's something that we have to be very critical about, and while being aware about that, we were thinking as architects, from our architectural perspective, of what could be the thought that kind of follows this horrible image. And we remembered Buckminster Fuller, an American architect, inventor, thinker, who said the following: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. You change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So we thought that's something interesting to start with, and we of course asked ourselves the question whether after decades of booming tourism industry with really wide impact on territories and economies all over the world, are there any non-intrusive ways of tourism? And most recently, and most importantly today, also what is the future of tourism as such? And you already all have been experiencing this type of things, where in Venice, this is the shot from Venice in 2014, where more and more often one can find cases and places where the word tourist is an insult, and the term tourist is increasingly used pejoratively, simply to imply shallow interest in the cultures and locations. Jaka was before me speaking about that very picturesque way. So making or experiencing the world in a different way it's not something completely new. I mean, we didn't really invent that, far from that. And that's being done all around the world in very different kind of ways of doing it. Just think of agritourism, where somebody can go and join a winery for the harvesting the grapes while spending their holidays there. So what we like to think that naming this type of activities nanotourism makes it much more obvious and visible to relevantly discuss about these alternative ways of tourism that obviously has to change in future. So what is nanotourism? We've started with that kind of composed word back in 2014 in Ljubljana in the Biennale of Design, which was called Bier 50, created by Jan Böhlen. We were one of the groups addressing nanotourism and figuring out what it is, and we came up with this little publication and also a working, let's say, title or definition of what nanotourism is. And we kind of imagine that this is, of course, a constructed term which is describing a creative critique to the current environmental, social, and economic downsides of conventional tourism. And nanotourism is also defined as a participatory, locally oriented, and bottom-up alternative. It's worth to say that it's not about scale only. It's more an ability to construct responsible experiences in a bottom-up process and using local resources. But we can even go a step further and say that nanotourism is beyond tourism. Again, it's more an attitude to improve specific everyday environments and also an opportunity for new local microeconomies. So in a diagram like that, you can maybe associate with these terms what nanotourism is and it's not. So it's kind of critical, participatory, bottom-up, site-specific, local, social, responsible, inventive, educative, and probably you could go on and kind of fill in this diagram with your own views of this kind of reality of certain terms. But if I want to kind of only emphasize one of those terms, it would be participation, which in a traditional model of, let's say, tourist provider and tourist consumer, there is only kind of one-way communication or one-way transfer. But with participation, this kind of transfer becomes an exchange between somebody that is provider and somebody who is not a tourist. And this participation that kind of turns the arrows in both ways can also make these two roles in a certain moment of time even to be switched. That's maybe something to be thought about in future. So briefly about the visiting school, which was anyway an architectural school that we were running for the past 2 days, and Jakob later on is going to briefly present the project that we have created with a group of students. We are architectural school, and of course this is a couple of examples of creative critique. This is our website where we have been doing like every year roughly 4 to 5 projects with students and groups. And all of those are kind of designed experiences with prototypes in scale 1:1 that have been given to users in order to test them out and to give us feedback. So that's kind of a repository of the project we have done, and we've done them in different, very different contexts around the world. With the Vienna design, maybe most obviously why is because we think that Vienna Design Week has a very interesting model or attitude towards the city, because every time it's on, it's kind of making a different relationship with different districts within the city of Vienna in such a way which obviously is an important way of how we treat the city and kind of engage with different parts of urban and social environment to in a way create a comprehensible life of the city, but also of people who are coming to visit Vienna Design Week, not only from abroad, but also from Vienna itself. So in a way, you kind of become a visitor in your own home environment. So one thing to stress out is the process that we are doing, which is the teaching process. It relates to place, user, and material. This is maybe a very simple way of defining architecture. And what is also important is that the projects were developed in a way that we start with research, with understanding what certain places or user groups are offering, or what are their specificities, and then we made the process of decision making, of designing something, designing the prototype that had to be made in scale 1-to-1, and given back to the research phase, back to users who kind of give us feedback, make another set of design decisions and so on. So this kind of circle was currently running for every project, maybe a couple of times during these 2 weeks. So participatory action research is one of the methods that we are using in the school to kind of unveil the hidden, which kind of becomes together with the obvious our working platform or a set of discoveries. But also, I think it's important just to throw in what are the teaching objectives. I think for young architectural design students, it's important nowadays to find their own opportunities for projects. And that it is also very important to learn by doing it, and of course, redoing it and so on. And of course, the design is a process of decision making with certain arguments of reason, and that architecture, as well as design, is done for the people. So this is an image of of our students this year, participants, mixed from design, architecture school, social design. They were all very ambitious and capable young creatives who have engaged with full-on energy for these 2 weeks. We were the mentors, together with Aline Zender, which I every year invite a different intellectual teacher to teach with us in order to also we kind of learn from each other. And of course, Amanda Schwager and Jakob Browning, who have been mostly responsible with this kind of school and these projects have happened by preparing everything for the whole year. We've been very happy to include all of these experts, guest experts, either through midterm juries or final juries or experts who came in to show their work and to have task grid with the students. So it has been a very good week with all these people that I'm super grateful to, because everybody has put in a lot of energy. And of course, it wouldn't have happened without generous input of sponsors. And maybe that's an opportunity to thank you for Werbung for the generous support. But again, we began a design week, the angewandte as the way how it's kind of put through. So now this is the cue back to you, Jakob. 5 projects with 5 titles that maybe you can run through and explain what we've done.
Okay, thank you very much, Alyosha. We'll just take a second so the camera readjusts. I will go through the 5 projects that were created this year. So, 5 projects dealing with, in fact, at the beginning, 5 different topics. But I'll just start with the projects in no particular order. First project called Passion Talks, which tried to pose the question: how can passions of local communities be identified and communicated to a larger audience to discuss the role of design in everyday life? So what they did is they picked upon or departed from the already traditional format of the Passionswege from the Vienna Design Week and tried to see what are the passions that are specific within the district of Meidling. And they went into very deep conversations, some of the members are also here, with members of the local community to try to understand what are truly their passions that are otherwise not being discussed as part of let's say, or one could say closed discourse of design. By having these deep conversations, they extracted specific statements or specific forms of knowledge that are being then communicated within public space. On one hand, on these posts, which are located in different areas around the district of Meidling, creating, on one hand, different types of tours throughout the districts, as well as different forms of engagement surrounding these stands, whereby you also, once you get there, you can look at the QR code to see an audio version of these discussions to get even more information about it. I think also throughout the week, since we had the last presentations, or the final presentations, roughly about a week ago, the group has extensively had different talks with the members that they talked to previously, but also new people to create new discussions on what are truly the passions within the district of Meidling. Next project, called Force by Choice, attempted to answer the question, how can today's COVID-19 reality create opportunities for visitors of Vienna Design Week to critically reflect on the notion of surveillance in cities. So what they quickly tapped on was this inevitable situation this year in front of the Festivalzentrale entrance, where there would be a queue. So with that queue, there was the opportunity to try to see how the people sitting there could find new forms of interaction or even critical interaction towards a particular topic. What they came up with was essentially an intervention both in physical and in digital space. The physical one being a sort of welcome desk when you come in front of the Zentrale, where you can clean your hands. Then you can scan the QR code to get a ticket for your waiting line. And then what you can do is to start to, so that's the procedure, and then you can start to interact with this game, which lets you to trade on one hand your waiting number, or you can complain about your waiting number, or you can simply look at the different types of visitors that are waiting there and create different types of interaction. That was project 2. Then the project 1 square meter market, which posed the question, how can Meidling market offer an alternative market experience to its existing and ever-growing new visitors? So the group identified very quickly that the waste management at the market, whilst efficient, it also leaves very valuable objects such as differently colored plastic baskets, which are used by the vendors, completely left alone and abandoned and unused. So they tried to see how that idea of reusing that waste material with a particular law which exists in Vienna that inhabitants of Vienna as well as visitors of Vienna, for 3 days in a year they can rent their own 1 square meter within most markets within Vienna to sell whatever goods they wish or to use it simply for something else. It costs around €2 per day to use it, so it's kind of very affordable and opens up many different questions of use. So these are the boxes which were then being negotiated with the manager of the market to see if it fits within the 1 square meter. But nevertheless, the group tested different uses of it, even during the workshop, but particularly also after the workshop has ended. Numerous collaborators have been added to this program to sell their products and to create a different type of, let's say, potential new microeconomy within the market. The project Cracks in the System attempt at the question, how can wild and unregistered trees provide a new form of climate literacy and an alternative greening strategy for Meidling? So the group initially tried to understand what is the role of nature within Meidling. And obviously there are more and more initiatives, particularly also now within the political climate, to try to create strategies for greening up the city of Vienna, but also Meidling in particular. And what they looked into is what they quickly found out just by being outside and looking at the registry of registered trees by the city of Vienna and the trees that are not registered. They identified potentials of creating a new knowledge surrounding what these trees could tell us, particularly in relation to the climate crisis. So what they created is a series of tours and storyboards where they explain specific facts about unregistered trees within Meidling that are indicative, or you could say are somehow treated as a symptom of climate change and kind of legible within the everyday streets of Meidling. And these stories are then also being further on explained through specific interventions for each of these identified trees, which creates a sort of different type of interaction during the walks that have been happening also continuously throughout the past week and will still continue in the next days. So on one hand, this was looking at the notion of when does a tree become registered or not. This was kind of being a provocative statement that a tree, in fact, in Vienna costs 20,000 euros to be planted with excavation and creating a Baumscheibe and putting an actual tree there, which are predominantly mostly also imported from Germany. And then also creating different types of tags for different species, just to create a different or a new type of narrative. Again, these excursions have been going on, combining and learning from local experts such as biologists, scientists, and also people from the Gebietsbetreuung exchanging differences of knowledge. Finally, also the project Urban Spa, which looked into the question how can thermal sulfur water, once in fact the defining characteristic of tourism, but how can it be reintroduced as a celebrated public resource of Meidling? And very early on within the project, they posed the question, where is the sulfur water, since that was kind of a defining characteristic. And what they did is kind of a two-part installation. One on top at the exit of the U4 station, Meidling Hauptstraße, and then on the bottom, where in fact through these pipes, these are the current pumps or let's say sources of sulfur water, which has been just recklessly flushed within the Wienfluss. So on one hand, down there, the water, a particular type of container was being installed to capture the water and to, on one hand, show the continuous flux of the water, but then to also pose this provocative question that since the water has been used for wellness and healing within tourism, but why could not this be again a spa? And then on the other hand, to have the installation which is much more didactical and educative, telling the story of the sulfur water through this sort of physical installation. And I think particularly within the last week it has sparked a lot of passers-by's interests and I think meaningful conversations. Also today, most recently, there's been a Lesung, I don't know how to say in English, and a sort of gathering to discuss the topic further. The project has even created its own patina over time, where some tiles have lost their numbering or their wording, going from urban spa to ur spa. even provoking some people to join in and to practice what you preach. No? So that's these are the projects which perhaps build now the backbone for the discussion. I would maybe now invite all the panelists to join. Thank you very much. Before I begin, I haven't introduced neither myself nor Alyosha. So just quickly to myself, my name is Jakob Traunik. I've been working at the TU Vienna since the last 5 years, and also I'm currently writing my PhD on the topic of nanotourism. I've been part of the AAA Nanotourism Visiting School also since 2014, together with Alyosha Dekleva. So I'll also introduce now Alyosha Dekleva, who is an architect and educator. He graduated in architecture from the Faculty of Architecture in Ljubljana and also from the AAA School of Architecture in London. He co-directs the Dekleva Grigoric Architects, which are based in Ljubljana and Slovenia. Together with his partner Tina Grigoric, he initiated the nanotourism research platform in 2014, and it's since been the head of the AA Nanotourism Visiting School program. Amongst various sort of engagements in guest professorships, he has been teaching at the ENSA PWS in Paris, at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany, and most recently in 2019, him and Tina were also holding the Frank Gehry Visiting Chair at the University of Toronto. Also introduce Amanda Sperger quickly, because she's also a vital part of our group at the AA Nanotourism Visiting School, who's been with us since the last 2 to 3 years, also working on the program. She's also working within architecture and social design in Vienna. Then, to go further, in let's say no particular order, I'll start with Brigitte. She's the head of the social design department at the Angewandte University of Applied Arts. She works as a curator and cultural theorist. Her projects and texts focus on themes within the field of cultural history, media history, and history of science, and have been shown respectively and been published internationally. So welcome and thanks for being here. Further on, Alina Lara de Zinde, who we've had the pleasure to have with us for this year's edition of the AA Nanotourism Visiting School. She's a curator, designer, and journalist. Together with Thomas Geisler, she curated the 26th Biennial of Design, Bio 26, with the title Common Knowledge, which was held in Ljubljana, Slovenia. She previously worked with Paola Antonelli at MoMA, New York, a pioneer department known as MoMA R&D. She is currently the co-founder of Saloon Wien, a network for women working in the arts in Vienna. Is also a member of the OECD think tank Future Democracy, and you're currently also very much involved in projects further on in Dresden at the Kunst- und Gewerbemuseum, further on with Thomas Geisler. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Gabriel Roland, which I think needs not too much introduction because you've probably been introduced numerous times this week, but nevertheless, the Vice Director, freshly Vice Director of Vienna Design Week. This year he also curated the digital Festivalzentrale, which is one of the newest platforms within Vienna Design Week. He also curated the Passionswege format for numerous years, which brings design and craft together, and is also responsible for the projects that are being exhibited at the guest country part of the Vienna Design Week. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And finally, last but not least, Petra Storba. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay. Okay, you're waving. That's great. She has been the CEO of the Austrian National Tourist Office since 2006. She holds a doctor's degree in political science and a master's degree in public relations and communication science, and in business administration with focus on tourism and small and medium-sized operations. She worked also previously as a tour guide, organized the group travel section of a subsidiary of Österreichisches Verkehrsbüro, headed the Austrian Convention Bureau, was advertising and marketing division manager for an Austrian provincial tourists board, division manager for national tourism politics in the Austrian Federal Ministry of Economy and Labor, and she headed the tourism and leisure time division of the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. Thank you very much for taking the time. Once again, we've also had the pleasure for having her as part of our jury, final jury, just about a week ago. Right, so to the panel talk, I would maybe like to start by, or what better way to start than within the institution that we're in, so the Vienna Design Week, and Gabriel Roland. So for sure we can kind of agree that there's a sort of or a need for a shift in agency of cultural institutions and events. No? And I think that's been a discussion within design since many years, but most notably also this year. And I think what's also interesting is that Vienna Design Week performs a kind of double role. If you think about tourism, every year you're kind of a host, but as well a visitor within the district that you're in. So could you tell us a bit more about the challenges that are associated with that, and how are you going?
I think we have a double role in two aspects here. So once we are, of course, as you say rightly, the visitor to other parts of the city, and then the ones that would normally be associated with design. We're also the host to, in other years, international visitors, but we're also the host to the Viennese who become visitors and tourists in their own city, because it is often that we hear as feedback from our visitors that they, for the first time, have visited a certain part of the city when being invited by Vienna Design Week to go there. So often this is with a certain kind of bourgeois amusement that, whenever do I go into the 15th district if not for Design Week? But in other cases it is actually being able to open up spaces that lie at everyone's doorstep, be that, and it has been mentioned, the Passionswege format. Often there's a certain threshold to enter spaces which you are maybe a bit unsure about what lies within. Something that you might do or have less inhibition to do when you're abroad, and you don't do in your own city because someone might want to sell something to you, something that you would not assume is absolutely normal when you're a tourist and everyone's trying to rip you off. But in your own city, you think you're clever and you try to avoid the situations. So being a public and an open festival, something that's free of charge, we have the opportunity to invite people into spaces so that they can enter without the danger of an embarrassing situation maybe, and have a sustainable effect on the relationship between different Viennese people or entities, who would then maybe realize that there's a repair shop on the corner of their street that they would have not normally wanted to enter. So, and in this year, and that's the particular challenge, one of these, that being the international part, completely fell through. And so we had to find maybe a renewed focus on this locality.
Yeah, maybe as a follow-up question to that, how maybe it's also too early to tell, but how would you, in this sense, measure the success of Vienna Design Week?
It's very hard, and of course this is something that journalists often like to ask, you know, how many visitors did you have? And of course we come up with numbers, but for me these numbers are, you know, it's hard to say that they are meaningless, because a lot of people kind of build their confidence and the success of their contributions to the festivals upon these numbers, and I would not want to call them meaningless, but for me they don't count that much. Mm-hmm. And I think this year has been instrumental in improving that, since a lot of the exhibitors have actually said, yes, of course, and everyone was expecting this, the quantity of visitors has sharply decreased, and we try to make a point of not promising. We don't do that usually, we don't promise any more visitors, but this year especially we kind of try to point it out that there might not be that many people traveling around the city, or feeling confident to come into crowded spaces or narrow spaces, and so on and so forth. But what I've heard from multiple sides is that in turn the quality of interactions has improved, and that you could identify more easily which visitors you want to interact with as an exhibitor, and which to focus on certain people and to actually build meaningful relationships with people and kind of facilitate relationships with these between the objects that you exhibit or the experiences that you offer and the people that come to see them. So keeping that in mind, I think it hasn't become easier to define something as a success or as a failure, but instead we have to take the hard route and kind of really examine the content and define modes of success or failure for each of the formats, and also maybe move away, and I guess this is a discourse that's, especially with tourism, you've very successfly introduced, to go away from the scale, and not to say that we had 40,000 visitors. Okay, but what kind of visitors were those? The number doesn't tell anything about that.
Thanks. I think definitely the notion of creating meaningful relationships or forms of exchange are definitely needed, and I think that also leads perfectly to a question I'd like to ask Brigitte. So meaningful relationships going into aspects of social design. So there are essentially two claims about social design. Social design is invisible, and the other claim is that all design is essentially social. There's no such thing as social design. How, maybe that was a kind of backdrop, how would you see the role of social design potentially in the development of, let's call it tourism experiences, but experiences in general?
Experience is a very broad notion of everything, or of perception, so to say, of the world around us. Let's get back to our sort of self-understanding. Social design is invisible, and I think everybody here is familiar with the work of Lucius Burkhardt, so it's clear where the reference is going. You put already in the introduction that one point in the nanotourism concept is it's a bottom-up concept. And I was asking myself already in the thinking about looking forward to this talk tonight and listening to the introduction, what makes it, or what makes this approach or the bottom-up so in the context of nanotourism productive? And I think to condense it, because we could go on forever to speak about the relation of tourism and social design. I think it's very essential to what does it mean to identify with a place, or being proud of something, or being confident of a certain affiliation, or of a certain belonging, or of maybe a very individual knowledge. And I think this is a strong base to enforce or empower people, who, if they are locals, and whatever local might mean, to give a very strong point on education, if you want, and to uncover to the people their own knowledge and their own, and to somehow trigger their reflection on what they know and where they are belonging. And I think it's very important to support the self-confidence, and there I would say one of the roles of social design in order to promote something like nanotourism. And of course we use, I would even say we use already strategies of nanotourism in many of the social design projects we are developing. Just seeing here Amanda, of course, and Anna, they were developing a very exciting project over the summer and introducing people in Vienna to swim in Donaukanal, which is not forbidden. And but there's something in the brains which makes it a crime, so to say, or which makes it appear as a violation of something, which is not. So, and this brings me again to another reference, a program we are now introducing in the course we will have in the winter term in social design. It's about fictional urbanism by Matilde Igual and Eleni Pulzika. And they will refer to the importance of fiction, of the narration of a city. So how is the fiction of, let's say, Vienna, as the given example, how is it actually shaping the planning of the city? How is it shaping the commodification of the city? How is it actually shaping the physical space? And I think this is another point where social design or nanotourism somehow getting together. On one hand, it's the empowerment of people, so this is physical, it's real, it's political, it's sociological. And on the other hand, it's something which sounds a bit more vague or theoretical, but actually it also has it has a terrestrial meaning, to put it in Latour terms. So how is the fictionality shaping actually the physics of the place we are in? And I think this is something we must never forget. And this is also why when I see a university coming in and us using our, so to say, very privileged bubble to come up with an impact or to come up with a reflection on the topic. And I think the whole department is very, the whole course is very much supporting this, getting the discussion or the confrontation sometimes, or the synergies between tourism, nanotourism, and social design, because I see a future in there, and also an existential future.
I think you point out really the importance of also what needs to be told, because not everything should be told, that there's also particular types of ways how things should be told in terms of narration. So this is then also, I think, my question perhaps further on for Alina.
Thank you.
I think it was really an absolute pleasure having you as part of the team. I think for the first time we've had somebody that is not necessarily from the architectural educational background or strictly design per se, but I think you predominantly you preoccupy yourself with communication design. And you kept on, I think, repeating with all the groups that we had that there's a very important difference or distinction between what's interesting to talk about and what's important to talk about. And that I think is kind of a very important factor to consider, particularly when it comes to, let's say, the role of storytelling, let's say in general, but also particularly if we talk now about tourism. So, where do you see, let's say, the importance of storytelling in curation in creating tourism experiences or also promoting tourism?
I think that is really funny that you caught up on this. I have to say that this is not my wisdom. This wisdom was passed on to me when I was studying journalism, and we have to really focus on how to tell the story, but not exactly what's just interesting, but what's important. And I kept on saying this to the groups because we, as you saw with the 5 projects that we developed together, they were super interesting in so many different ways. And we have to keep on asking this question, like, so where to stop the research or where to dig a little bit deeper, and you have to say what's important according to your project, what you want to say. In journalism, for example, of course, if you're a beat reporter, it's my case that I write about design and culture. So for me, everything is interesting when I see design. But if you're going to publish this in a mainstream newspaper, for example, you have to think about who's going to read this, if they're going to get it, if they're going to understand or not. And if it's of course relevant in terms of context, time, space, right? So it's important for the time. For example, just did a whole project talking about the mask as the object of 2020. And there's, if you start talking about the mask, for example, it can go from rituals to the medical history of the mask, to materials, to how to use it, if it's actually relevant to use it or not. There are so many different aspects that you can discuss just about one single object. Imagine when you go and visit one space. So I can tell you guys that I know much, much more about Meidling, that I came for the first time about 3 weeks ago, than I know about the second district where I live. Much more. So because of all this research that we've been doing here, and hearing the stories and talking to people and so on. So in terms of bringing this knowledge on how to tell the story, and I completely agree with Brigitte that fiction and telling stories shape everything, shape the state, the cities where we live and our homes, how you talk about yourself. You are the story you tell, the way you present yourself, of course, it's important. And for tourism, I think it's super important to reframe it, these images that I also like to show in his presentation with these beaches full of people, it completely creeps me out. I'm from Brazil, so I'm used to see these images on summertime. And we have 7,000 kilometers of coast, so the impression we have is that people don't know about this other space. They just go to Rio, and that's it, or Bahia. But it's just a matter of reframing it and how we talk about all the spaces, and that you always have something more to discover. Like we discovered all these, brilliant spots in Meidling. Like we discovered a Michelin restaurant in the market that we've been to. My first Michelin restaurant in Vienna, so I was here in Meidling. And the sulfur water, we have this wellness potential here that actually the people from Meidling don't know about it anymore. So it's all about uncovering and unveiling the stories, like you guys like to say, and tell them. I think it's super, super important, not just to find the facts interesting and keep it, but actually to spread it.
Thanks. I think that nicely fits also now maybe to the more digital side of the panel, particularly Peter Stoiber, being in fact now I'm not sure if it's an entirely enviable situation being the head of the Österreich Werbung right now, but I would be interested. Let's say I think it's even predominantly interesting that the Austrian Tourism Office in German translates to Österreich Werbung, or if you translate it literally back, it's Marketing Austria. I'm wondering now in this crisis that we're in, what are the sort of challenges to market Austria and for whom, and what are the sort of visions for, I don't think it's for the next year, but at least for the next months.
First of all, I do hope you can hear me. Everything is okay? Yeah? Perfect, yeah. So coming back to your first question, in English it would be the Austrian National Tourist Board, but actually our tasks, they change really fast because it's getting more and more from marketing to managing a destination, and I think this would be another interesting discussion, but maybe we will touch that later on. You said what kind of challenges we got and the future perspectives. Well, from my point of view, the tourism industry faced already major coronavirus challenges already. Travel industry was already suffering from a loss of trust and image. Imagine or remember Thomas Cook liquidation, geopolitical uncertainties, climate and over-tourism debates led to a clear change in travel patterns already. For some time, probably the industry has been fluctuating between seemingly unstoppable growth, mass tourism, as you already mentioned, and an increasing load of challenges that calls for a profound shift in thought and direction. So actually, we are looking for a new tourism model that incorporates ecological, economical, and sociocultural dimensions in the best possible way. So my personal vision is a responsible tourism. And responsible tourism is all about making better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit, but in that order. So tourism is no longer viewed on a microeconomic level. It's not about individual establishments anymore. It's about understanding tourism as part of the living space, and tourism lives with and not from a region. So that's somehow my point for the future.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much for that. I'm wondering also, since the Austrian National Tourism Office is on one hand promoting Austria, but I think also you and your colleagues are working extensively on networks within Austria and how to establish, I guess now, new forms of collaboration between partners. So could you maybe talk about a bit who are these partners that you're targeting with, and what are you trying to change?
Mm-hmm. Well, a DMO, a Destination Management Organization, has a lot of stakeholders actually, and as times get more complex, of course, the approaches, they differ as well. Tourism, if you go for a 1 week winter holiday in Austria, you will have to deal with 43 individual suppliers. There is nobody who orchestrate those companies. That means we are a very fragmented industry. Everything is like, it's really like single, unique spots, and that means you have to install networks, you have to cooperate, and you have to find different modes of working together, because otherwise it's impossible to generate future tourism, to generate a future tourism that will have a possibility to survive somehow, because the existing model, from my point of view, will not succeed any longer.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. I think we'll come back maybe with some questions from the audience on that as well. I'd also have a question now for Alyosha. So this is more perhaps of a question that goes or is addressing the notion of education and tourism, because there's obviously a very strong link historically. I think tourism was one of the particularly one of the first forms of alternative education, where back in the 18th century within the Grand Tour, the people that had the capabilities were traveling around the world and learning by doing or learning by experiencing. Therefore, the experience of being part of something and having a meaningful exchange was sort of the best form of learning something. And I think that's something we discussed also within the nanotourism visiting school a lot, that this learning by doing component is super vital. So could you explain a bit more, Alyosha, how do you see nanotourism in general as a form of learning?
Well, nanotourism is a form of learning. I mean, with all that we have, what I was describing in the beginning as an introduction, and with all the projects that have been running for the past 2 weeks, it was mostly about discovering and learning how we can take on existing knowledge and transform it into a new value for visitors and inhabitants alike. So in order to change something and to propose a different set of models, as Petra, you were speaking about, that this is kind of a long-awaited moment that we have to do it in a way, we have to first learn, and the model of nanotourism is a way of learning. But on the other hand, we learn all life. When we stop learning, then our lives kind of become obsolete somehow. And I think nanotourism, specifically now in this situation that we have found out due to all restrictions of the pandemic, but also previous to it, like Petra, you were explaining how this kind of shift in people's mind have already moved away from the mass type of travel and so on and so on. It is an opportunity to go and discover and learn new types of or new ways of doing that. So now in this situation, we have to kind of rediscover and relearn which things are worth in our lives to be redefined and to be pushed forward for new experiences. Again, for visitors and inhabitants alike. And I really appreciate, Petra, when you were saying that new tourism, as you were defining it in one of your sentences, that the order of who comes first is like very important. And I think that's something that we can all agree and sign on. But going back to learning, I mean, as architects, I mean, I always try to kind of grow out and think out of my own experience due to the exchange. We have to kind of relearn what is urban versus what is rural. Suddenly the people's flow in urban centers in a way become questionable, and it's more and more popular to enjoy and see our futures in the rural environment. And there are so many initiatives coming up where governments and different local communities try to make the rural environment much more compelling for people to actually stay there and inhabit those environments as opposed to big urban centers. That's one thing that we have to, as architects, learn. The other one is, for example, housing, collective housing. We've learned that the most models that we know from collective housing, where people kind of identify with the large group of people identifying, not really what people kind of need now and what is a necessity in this kind was saying that one of his housing projects, he spent years of researching and asking people what they really want, and so many answers he got in the direction that they would prioritize having their own entrance from the street. So we have to relearn what the collective housing is as well as architects. And here I'm coming to the tourism, to learn what tourism is and how tourism infrastructure has to change. This kind of model of nanotourism is an opportunity to do that, because it kind of allows for experimentation. And I think this is a good and most important keyword that I would like to put forward. Because with experimentation, we can clearly and very consciously move away from existing models or existing way of doing things like inertia. And we can also allow ourselves for a certain amount of failure, which in the society where only speaks about growth and success, the failure is kind of a prohibited word, even, let alone, accepting failure on an institutional level. But without experimentation and failure, we cannot learn. And go back to nanotourism, this kind of experimentation that we do within a form of a school of teaching, I think that's an important start to kick out this kind of experimentation is absolutely necessary. And I hope that in the model of bottom-up, if we are at the very bottom doing something like in a relatively small scale and so on, we can grow this model of experimentation larger or higher levels of institutionalized decision-making of experimentation, allowing failure, and then learning of how we can go forward. So ultimately, just to give you another example to conclude, my intervention here is that, I've learned while I was staying in Vienna in one of the small hotels during the school. The Dakar Hotel has fired so many people who were, like more than 100 who were working there. And obviously, Dakar Hotel has only been based, their model of financial existence for the visitors who came abroad with airplanes. And I think it's such touristic infrastructure, and Dakar Hotel is not the only one, it's like kind of a lot of those, this infrastructure have to ask themselves what they can offer to the local population, the neighboring inhabitant, in order to kind of transform it into a model that will sustain within the city. Excuse me.
I thought that was very interesting when you talked about the possibility of failure, but isn't that also then a question of scale? Of course, within the scale that you were working in at the visiting school, you can do a project, you can redo a project, and if you don't sell it the once go out into the market one day, you change the product the next day. But what about a larger scale? You could argue that Sacher, they've just failed now. Now they're trying something else with less people. But of course, this is a catastrophe, and it's a symptom of a capitalist system where a company in 1 year makes a profit of a couple of million, and the next year and I'm interested on your point of view, in the relation between failure and the scale of a project, or whether it's indeed a different sort of approach that has nothing to do with the scale of the project.
Well, I think the scale anyway matters. So, it's in a way kind of very comfortable to argue for failure on a small scale, as you were saying. But I think we have to, it's our job as a society or as professionals, thinkers, that we have to kind of push that on a larger model in order to test it out. Again, I cannot do anything but argue for experimentation. And I would, these hotels, which are kind of next door where I live, I would suggest them to really try and experiment the models of how they can turn out their infrastructure into something that they can offer to me as neighbor right away. And I think this is, to discover what this is, I think it's a necessity to go through a set of maybe smaller scale projects in order to test them out, see which ones they actually fail or succeed, and then try to kind of make that the ones that are performing in a way that are logical, sustainable, and so on, further on. So I think there is a way to bring this experimentation on a larger level gradually, but I don't think it can work from a top-down perspective, because then you have this blockade of thinking that you cannot do something which is big scale and not allow yourself to fail. But within the bottom up, I think that's possible, and we are trying to kind of prove it right.
Am I allowed to add something?
Please.
Okay, I think it's quite simple. We're living in an age of complexity. It's non-linear world, So it's a world of prototyping. That's it. And my favorite quote is, "Paths are created by walking." That's it. I mean.
Yeah.
Brigitte, you have a point to that?
I was asking myself, because we were speaking about nanotourism, and then I had in mind the hacking of Paola Antonelli's quote, and I was trying to do this hacking and asking myself, who is a nanotourist, or what is a nanotourist, or how would I define myself as a nanotourist in the city I'm living in, or is the whole notion of nanotourism also very much addressing and focusing on something, what is the citizen in the city, or am I a neighbor, am I a citizen, to what extent do I feel responsible, how mobile am I in my own city? And Gabriel was saying it's a sort of bourgeois approach, I would never come to the 15th district without the Vienna Design Week, but this is you're also addressing a social class mobility within the city. So would nanotourism mean a democratization of tourism, or is it just opening up Hotel Sacher again to a very small and exclusive group of people living or being already in Vienna? I think we must not forget about the whole political, economical and social notion of nanotourism. And again, I think there's a dark side also, could be a dark side of nanotourism, again excluding people from that. And again, meaning, of course, then it's a sort of more local and smaller way of selling parts of the city or great possibilities and things we enjoy. But again, we create a difference, and I think this is a bit lacking for me to now do a bit of sparing in the discussion of nanotourism. It's lacking, or we could say maybe it's not, and we should somehow speak about it. But isn't nanotourism also something very exclusive? Though we are under the constraints of a crisis, and it seems everything is then democratic, and we are all sitting in the same boat. We are not, as we know. And the crisis is really opening up these social gaps in a tremendous and horrible way. And I'm really very, very concerned about how to return to a pre-crisis state, and I don't see it. And so I think nanotourism has this point. And we should really not forget about it. So the exclusivity of nanotourism and the bourgeois side of it. Yeah.
I mean, I have a small response to that. I mean, I think one could perceive it in current form as exclusive. I think what we particularly also try to advocate for within the visiting school is that every user has a specific name, a specific surname, has a specific set of skills and qualities and interests and needs, and that's something that nanotourism tries to address, whether you're a visitor or you're a local. In that sense, if you create projects that are solely based on an interaction or sort of dependency on very specific user groups, then one might see it as sort of exclusive towards other forms. But then I always try to remind myself of a lecture that John Thackeray had. He's a sort of collector of bottom-up initiatives from all around the world since a very long time. And he showed once during the lecture a diagram of pluralities of small systems working together, interdependently. And I think this is what, I mean, it's a shame we can't show the diagram here now, but I think having that sort of way of thinking or developing systems, these sort of polycentric areas that are intertwined and interdependent, I think once you see that on that abstract level, I think it only becomes, I don't think exclusive, but sort of systems that interact and learn from one another. And I think the question of exclusivity or inclusivity then becomes something else. But that's sort of my point of view.
It's your vision.
That's my hope. Well, I think practicing it, and I think testing it, and I think that's what we try to do with the visiting school. I think it already shows those signs that the more specific certain projects are to certain people, the more can also different people identify with it in a different way than within traditional systems where you say that this is a festival for everybody, or this is an event for everybody, as opposed to this is an event for specific people that have a specific feedback for.
But may I insist a little bit?
Sure.
So if this big tourism is not functioning any longer because under given conditions, does this automatically mean nanotourism is growing, or is it just growing for a certain group of tourists? Or are the tourists who used to go to, I don't know, to Tenerife or Benidorm or places like that, are now turning into nanotourists? Or are these just the people who had already a very sort of high-level educated tourists really discovering or some educating themselves? Are these the people now the ones who are, so to say, the perfect nanotourists?
It's a problem of supply, right?
Yeah, but you could say nanotourism is somehow very easily accessible. You would not need a lot of supplies. So it might could be that it should be more open to very many people. No,
I think it's not so easy. I mean, this
is what I mean.
These guys worked really hard for like 3 weeks. It's not so easy to come up with these projects that do this in a sensible way. It seems easy because we feel like everything is there, but I think the nanotouristic sort of experience has to be created, just like the hotel tower has to be built by the beach. There have to be architects, designers, community organizers there to make this, and if no one is there to make this, I think no one can consume it or participate.
This is not what I meant. It's not that. I think this was a very great summer school with a great project and outcomes. I'm just addressing more because we had sort of a general and more abstract discussion of the importance of nanotourism, and I'm not against nanotourism. This is, I think, this would be complete.
That's not what I meant. No, absolutely.
No, but I'm just asking because for me, maybe because I'm also a bit professionally deformed already. I'm just wondering. What is the vision of nanotourism? Is there a vision? Is there a sort of a dream in front of us?
Let me interact a bit. I mean, I completely understand, Brigitte, this kind of question. What does it happen on directly? I mean, how to apply nanotourism or confront nanotourism within the model of mass tourism that we saw that part of the image, and that's something that has been popping out in our let's say work throughout. And one of the reasons, this is one of the reasons why we also went to Honolulu one year. simply to Waikiki Beach. One of the groups was interacting in maybe one of the most popular beaches in the world, or at least most known as a touristic beach in the world that everybody wants to go or even get married there or something like that. And this group of students identified a very interesting problem that maybe happens just a few bays further on Waikiki. The coral reef is dying because people are using the wrong sunscreen. Sunscreen is killing the coral reef. And of course, you have on the market also, the ecological sunscreen protects you from the UV radiation of the sun, but at the same time preserve and doesn't really kill the coral reef. And they have made a project, an interaction of entering into this kind of space environment where you would probably superficially say that people are not interested and they are just kind of one-liner going there for the beach to have a bath and some sun. But the whole social scene, when they were kind of intervening for this more or less 14 days, started to slightly change. So they have created a project with the title Shade on You, which kind of implied already by saying that certain thinking of what are you doing, if it's right or it's wrong, and so on and so on. And that was, to my mind, one of the possible answers how you can also intervene in such environments that you started to speak about. And again, it's like starting somewhere in a very kind of focused area with some very focused people who are obviously, they have to be kind of receptive and they have to kind of engage into communication, and then you start changing things. And obviously, I mean, kids are the first ones to actually engage in communication and interaction, but then also others follow. So in my way of understanding this, that nanotourism can also change, maybe within, in certain moments, also this kind of a model of very obvious and top-down mass tourism.
Next. So, can you guys hear me? First of all, thank you. I love it that it's so provocative, yes. So we can create some conversation. But I have two things to add to that ideal of super democratic, everything, it fits everyone, and everyone is super inclusive and so on. I believe this utopian idea is bound to fail, as every utopia was realized, because there's never a model that fits all, doesn't exist. I wish it would exist as any dreamer, but it doesn't exist one model that fits all. And the model that would fit all is flexibility, that we can be whatever we want and do whatever we want. And this is the utopian of 21st century, I guess. What I would like to say a little bit of nanotourism, what I've learned for the past, I don't know, half a year that we've been talking about it and working together, is that it's actually a choice, it's actually an approach, and is an intelligent or deliberate decision on how you act as a tourist and a visitor where you go. So as opposed to a stupidity as being just a lazy tourist, where you just go consume the resources where you go, you just don't care about the sunscreen that you're putting, don't care about the biological life around the sea that you're swimming. So this is completely stupid and therefore open to everyone, because you can just be lazy about it. If you want to be a little bit more, take the decision, take the choice, this is work, and of course it's related to education. If it's related to education, it is related to privilege, of course. So, I mean, but in any case, I think being in a developed country is a choice that we can make. So it's still open to everyone to decide to be a nanotourist. Let's say if you want to use the term, you can choose to be a nanotourism in your own city, and when you travel, you can do that. So in this sense, I guess it's pretty open. It's just, right? I don't know. This is my opinion. So what I've learned so far.
I mean, I would agree with it. I think I don't think these are closed systems. You know, I think they're sort of porous systems that again interact with one another and open up these opportunities for people that really have that interest to engage. And I think the point is also that there's a meaningful engagement. You know? And I think as soon as that comes into play, the ambitions to take part in these sort of activities or projects is completely different. And I think, talking about the projects before that we've developed here, this year is a sort of unique situation that we haven't had with the visiting school yet. In recent years, that we now have this sort of 10-day push within the Vienna Design Week, partially also exposure, but sort of push to for the groups to continue the projects, you know, and they gain on their own life, you know, and own agendas, and they kind of who knows what will happen next week. You know? So just some of the pictures that I showed today, they happened like that.
I think this is also this is the for me one of the very strong points also of the project on this concept of nanotourism, or what Gabriel said before. Even if it's a, so to say, small scale project or small initiative, it has all the potentials to trigger something to somehow make bigger circles possible. So it seems to be a small thing going on 2 days or 3 days, but I can also from the presentation, and I had the chance to be there at the Midgrid, to see the potential, or it's already there, and I think this is a great outcome, and I'm also very impressed. Actually, I have to say what is possible in 2 very intense weeks. Yeah, and I'm absolutely convinced about. Maybe this is not what we should easily call bottom up, but because you were speaking about systems, what can a very small system provoke in a bigger system? And I think this is what we should actually return, and you should have the next summer school again in Vienna to see what happened to the project and to have a sort of following up. Really, it's all. I think it's also one of the core concepts is how these are sustainable things, and we always say in social design, we can only start project, but it's very hard to finish. And where to, we do not want to finish. So we are very careful about what we are starting with.
Yes, and I think that's the core thing. You know, it's not so much for me, as I understand nanotourism, about a personal choice about how I act and whether I engage with the person or just stupidly walk along a path. But it's a systemic change. It's a different approach to what it means to be a tourist, not a different way of being a tourist, but it's kind of changing that meaning. And I think this is the reason why the Buckminster Fuller quote was in there. I think there needs to be this systemic change, and that's why the visiting school is important, because it kind of creates this small scale where we can try this systemic change out. But I have to absolutely agree with you. I think the vision has to be where do we take this experience from these many small projects, and what Alyosha has said, that the small project can interfere with the larger ones and maybe impact them in a positive way. So it would be very interesting to examine in the cases where this has worked, where actually the small system or the systemic change on the small scale has impacted a larger system. What was it? What was the defining factor in the success of these projects, and are we able to replicate these methods?
Okay, I mean, I have a couple more questions, but I think we're running short on time. Are there any particular questions from the audience? Yes?
Can I just scream?
I think.
Okay. Try to speak through my math. It's a part A and part B, not really a question, but diffuse ideas. We didn't really hear about, let's say, in the context, especially in the context of mass tourism, is the temporal aspect. We have high seasons, you have rush hours. What is the temporal aspect of a nanotourism? I would say on the example of the sulfur project, we just looked at this a couple hours ago. What's nice about that is that you can go on a Wednesday at 2 in the morning and the story is still there. Yeah? Maybe that's coming from the perception of an urban explorer who goes looking for these kind of things. And maybe that's what a nano-tourist could be compared with. Maybe. The B part is the idea of a tourist guide. Is this the person who guides around these hordes of people at these rush hours and makes the problems in cities until it's a point like Venice where you can't, when it's all the time. Yeah? So what is the nano-tourist guide? Is it after the design week is over, how do people find these stories? Is it a book? Is it a person? Yeah? And
I would be interested in your interpretations, maybe, of that.
I'm not just speaking from the social design perspective. This is the temporal aspect is very interesting because we are very often confronted with that. It seems that social design is a program mostly targeted on the warm season. We deal with public space, but I think thanks to the crisis, we are now very strongly reclaiming public space also during the cold season and in winter time. So I think we are very much provoked also to reconceptualize certain approaches, routines in working outside. And what does this imply also in a very basic notion of design? How do we conquer these spaces? How can we bear to be outside for many hours in the city, and why? And we are now. It's so obvious why it's so necessary to do that. And the second part was that I think the guide is this is also something really very important, that to keep not only the memory but to keep the dynamics of this great project. So, and of course, it's also somehow in the responsibility of the groups and the people doing the project, but I think they should have all the motivation to do so, because this work was intense and it was absolutely not for nothing, and it would be actually a pity to your own work to leave it behind. I would not recommend that, because I think it would be a waste. Yeah.
About the time aspect, I think that's very interesting. That a lot of the non-touristic projects might not depend on the season, but they depend on very ephemeral phenomena. You can only have the market stall for 3 days in a year. Once the building site that discovered the sulfur source is finished, there's going to be a shiny new building there. It's gone. So the season might be something else. The non-touristic season might be a once in a lifetime sort of thing that you cannot actually replicate, where you can only take the experiences and maybe apply them to other projects. And I think about the guide, this is indeed a very interesting question, whether in this model of supplier and user, or nanotourism, supplier and nanotourist, whether the need for a guide might have vanished, or whether that's actually not true. Whether that system, in the linear system, the tourist who wants to consume a certain place or a culture or whatever might be in need of a guide because he's disoriented or whatever. But the nanotourist, because he is in a participatory sort of exchange with wherever he is, maybe in the relationship between the nanotourist and the nanotourism supplier, they dissolve the need for a guide, but maybe that's not true, and because there is a nanotourism book and there's a room in the design week and so on. So a certain aspect of guiding is still needed, but maybe because we're still in the process to reaching a enlightened nanotourist state. I don't know.
May I just very shortly comment on that? I think especially with the Sulfur project, the impact is already here because the memory is revived, and it will be unforgettable for quite a time. Yeah, no, for sure.
It's on the underground, literally. It's there. The stream it's an undercurrent, still going to Baden or whatever the line is. So it's a hidden story. Maybe you don't see it as obvious as now, but it's still there.
Then it becomes a fiction.
Absolutely, the narration has changed already, and sometimes the fiction does survive on a very longer term than actually physically.
Well, the fiction survived in the coat of arms of Meidling. The fiction was there, the source was there, but no one knew what it meant. It was like a
now we
know.
We are not forgetting.
Just 2 comments. First of all, thank you for the questions. I really, really like the questions to make the parallel with tourism as we know it, even with the names, the proper, like what would be a guide, what would be the seasons of nanotourism. So I really like this idea also for your research, Jakob, that you could include that. What I would like to comment in terms of guide, it's actually for each project, the people who are guiding the project are deeply involved in developing the experiences, the project, and some of the research, and so on. And if not, they are people deeply knowledgeable about the subject. So, for example, in the Cracks in the System, the nature tour, the walk, there are some tours that are done by biologists living in Meidling that know exactly about the trees here. So I guess if I would say, like, what would be a guide, a nanotourist guide, that would be a person that really has involvement with the knowledge and has the passion to pass it on. Not just because, if you think about mass tourism, what we see as guides is very generic, and any one of us could be a guide here in the first district in Vienna. Just open a book and read to this short paragraphs, and that's it. They are not truly involved. I love, Mozart so much, and I will talk about this, but I will refer to Southport. It's not like this. And I think in the sense of nanotourism, there is this engagement with the topic that is there, and then therefore you pass this knowledge on with certain, the experiences there with the passion of who's talking about it as well. So I think it's very, really bring it a little bit back to storytelling. It's how you tell it.
And I think it's also important that it's your story.
Yeah.
I just want to say another appraisal to one as an experience, maybe that fits to the Hintergrund, this empowerment of the local or of both parties, the bringer and the consumer, or whatever this relationship is. But the ones we swam in the market, for example, I consider myself a quite alert Viennese inhabitant, and I didn't, and so quite aware, and I looked for unregistered trees and things like that. But I didn't know simply that you could have this market stand 3 times. So I would actually go and pack something on, or maybe, some Dadaistic or my clothes or whatever, and I would definitely use that. And it was there already, but you needed someone to lift it to the light, and it's a right that was already there, and I know about such little loopholes, and so I know in law, in other terms, coming from the collective housing and squatting in Holland and so, but this was, it's the same with like dumpster, so that you don't know, can I take it, but I just say that was good, now I do.
Alyosha and Petra, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I would just like to thank you for this last comment, because this is to have this feedback that we have actually changed somebody's opinion, life, and experience within their own city. It's really rewarding.
Thanks.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think to go back to your sort of question, what's the vision of nanotourism? I think there's many visions that constantly change, maybe seasonal, but I think hourly. No, I think being seasonal is being generic. I think you need to be hourly. No? I think this sort of notion of time is extremely important to address in temporal aspects and so on. But I think ultimately what nanotourism can strive to is to reveal the things that are already there, but we're just not seeing it. No, we're just either we're trained to not see it, or we're trained, or we don't have the capacity to either approach, let's say, local people to understand what they're about, what are their needs, or even understanding the laws, which are not communicated and could be beneficial for certain things. And I think nanotourism, at least as a sort of provocator initially, and then also facilitator of conditions for people to re-see the environment in which we're currently in. I think that maybe is a wrap on that note. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Alyosha and Petra, for taking the time to be with us online, and thanks everybody for coming today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody.